So today we are going to study about the 4 books of Gospel, second time, right? 4 books of Gospel, and the small title we can say, subtitle we can say, characteristic of each Gospel, characteristic of each Gospel. Last week we learned about the author and the time of writing and the place of writing and things like that. And one of the questions that I received was that why the disciples and why apostles did not write the Bible immediately, right? Because Jesus was crucified on about 30 AD, right? When he was about 33 or 34 years old, 33 years old. Then why the disciple did not write right after the ascension of Jesus Christ is because when Jesus ascended to heaven, he promised that he will come again, right? He will come again, right? And that he will come again. It doesn't grammatically, literally, it doesn't contains the meaning of I will come again in long future, right? It doesn't. It actually, when we go out from this church today, we will say see you later, right? Or goodbye, right? So that means we will see it again, right? We will see it again immediately. So when Jesus said I will come again, that was similar to that sort of expression. So he said I will come again means we will see each other very soon, right? So the apostles and disciples, because they believe that Jesus will come back in their lifetime, right, in the days of their lives, so they didn't they didn't understand they needed to write Bible. However, when it comes to about 50 AD, 70 AD, right, between 50 to 70 AD, the Gospels were written. And there was a time that the apostles were martyred, and then apostles got, become old, and the 70 disciples were about to, end their lives, right? And then, of course, there were cases like that. I heard from Jesus Christ, but it was not right? People can just claim, anyone just could claim that, this is what Jesus said, but in the can you hear it? Okay. Can you hear it? Right. Is it not from the monitor speaker? Is it from the main speaker? Is it? Okay. Okay. So. Where I was. Disciples, they believe that Jesus will come again soon, right? And then there were cases like that. People say that I heard it from Jesus Christ. I heard it from the direct disciples of Jesus Christ, right? But then later on, as the direct disciples, not only apostles, but direct disciples, were about to be gone away from the world, that there are no more people to confirm what they say or what they said is actually from Jesus Christ or not, right? So only that time the people, disciples and apostles, started to feel that they needed to write something so that people after their generation could receive properly and correctly, right? Right, so that was the reason why the Bible is not written immediately after the ascension of Jesus Christ. So today we are going to learn about the characteristic of each gospel. And firstly, the book of Matthew, right? Matthew. The main characteristic of the Gospel of Matthew is Jewish writer wrote to Jewish reader. So Jews to Jews. Right? The Gospel of Matthew is written by a Jewish writer initially to the Jewish readers, right? So it has examples and the clues that this gospel is written by Jewish writer to Jewish people because, firstly, there is an expression regarding to the feast of unleavened bread. Feast of unleavened bread. What is the main characteristic? What is the typical thing about the day of unleavened bread? The first day of the unleavened bread, what happens? First day of unleavened bread, feast of unleavened bread, what happens? They slaughter the Passover lamb, right? 14th day, yes, the Passover is the 14th day, but we learn, right? The moment that they killed and they eat the Passover lamb is the first day of the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Because all Jews know well about the Feast of Unleavened Bread, if you look at Matthew chapter 26, verse 17, Matthew 26, verse 17, it uses the expression on the first day of unleavened bread. Right? On the first day of unleavened bread, right? It doesn't include any extra additional information, right? Whereas the same expression, the sin was described in Gospel of Mark and Luke, right? They use additional information as it is the day when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed. So let's read Matthew chapter 26, verse 17.
Now on the first day of unleavened bread, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover?"
Right, and Mark chapter 14, verse 12.
And on the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was being sacrificed, his disciples said to him, "Where do you want us to go and prepare for you to eat?"
Amen. Luke chapter 22, verse 7 is same, right? So you can see the difference between Matthew and Mark and Luke, right? Matthew, the author, doesn't really feel that he needed to explain about what the Feast of Unleavened Bread is, right? But then the author of Mark, author of Luke, somehow felt that they needed to explain what it is, right? So from there we can say the Gospel of Matthew was written by Jewish writer to Jewish readers initially, right? There are a few more examples, few more clues that expression regarding to the Sabbath. Expression regarding to the Sabbath. So if you look at Matthew chapter 24, verse 20.
Pray that your flight may not be in the winter or the summer.
Right. So while prophesying about the end, it says, but pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath, right? So Matthew says, not in a winter or nor on a Sabbath, right? But Mark chapter 13, verse 18. Mark chapter 13, verse 18. I'll read it for you. But pray that it may not happen in the winter, right? The author of Mark, he didn't include on the Sabbath, right? It may be because the reader of the Gospel of Mark, right? The author of Mark thought that they may not understand what the Sabbath is, right? So he did not include it. But the author of Matthew says either winter or on a Sabbath, right? So that also is the clue that the Gospel of Matthew is written to Jewish readers, right? Thirdly, it's about the expression regarding to a tomb. Expression regarding to a tomb. Generally, according to Jewish culture, their style of tomb is either stone cave, right? You remember when Jesus Christ was laid on the Joseph's Arimathea's tomb, right? It wasn't the barrier, right? It was actually the stone cave, right? And place the body inside, and they lock the entrance, right? So that is actually Jewish culture of tomb. There is either stone cave or underground tunnel. It's either stone cave or underground tunnel. And what happened is, around about 15th of Adar, 15th of the 12th month, right? Every month they colored their tombs, all the tombs with lime white. You know, when you go to burial in these days as well, you can see the white color, the powders there, right? That is the lime white, or the powder of lime, right? So Jews, they colored all the tombs with a lime white, or another way to say is a whitewashed tomb. They wash the tombs with a lime white. The reason is because the first month, when it comes to Nisan, the first month, when there comes to the feast of Passover, many people from abroad, right, will come back to Jerusalem, right? And on the way to the temple, Jerusalem, right, by accident, they may not, in order to protect them, touching the tomb by accident, right? So they painted in white, so that they are showing that this is a tomb, right? This is a grave, so do not touch, right? According to the law, if they touch something unclean, they are unclean for several days, right? So they may not be able to attend Passover, the feast of the Passover, right? So that was their culture, Jewish culture. So let's look at Matthew chapter 23, verse 27.
Pharisees, hypocrite, for you are like whitewashed tomb, which on the outside appear beautiful, but inside they are full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness.
So the Matthew uses this the image of whitewashed tomb, right, to describe about Pharisees, right, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites. Whereas Luke chapter 11, verse 44. Luke chapter 11, verse 44. Right, the concealed tomb. So Luke uses the image of concealed tomb, right? Concealed tomb. What is concealed tomb? This is a burial tomb, right? But normally when we bury people, when we go to burial place, we have this wound, right? We have this little hilltop there, right? Sorry, I don't know the word. So there is a little hilltop, right? This concealed tomb, right, symbolize that it's the barrier, but without that the ground, without that the top. So it's the same level as the normal street. That is a concealed tomb, and that was used by Gentiles. So in the Gospel of Luke, right, rather than whitewashed tomb, he changed that expression to concealed tomb, so that the readers may be able to understand easily, right? So we can see that the Gospel of Matthew was written to the Jewish readers, right? Jewish readers. Secondly, the characteristic of the Gospel of Matthew is it explains the relationship between Jesus and the Lord. And the law. So Jesus and the law. Because the Gospel of Matthew was initially written for the Jews, it deals the relationship between Jesus and the law in depth. deeper than other gospels. For example, if you look at Matthew chapter 5 verse 17. Matthew chapter 5 verse 17.
Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish but
Amen. Right. So the Jews were the people who believed the law is the highest command from God, isn't it? By that time, the law is the most fundamental thing for them, isn't it? So because this Gospel of Matthew is initially written for the Jewish readers, right? The author felt that he needed to explain between the law and Jesus, right? Why we have to move from the law to Jesus Christ, right? What is the relationship between them, right? And why do we have to stop following the law only, but move to Jesus Christ, right? So there are many scriptures in the Gospel of Matthew explains about the prophecy and the fulfillment and the life of Jesus Christ, right? Prophecy and the fulfillment of the and the life of Jesus Christ as the fulfillment, right? However, to the Gentiles who did not regard the law as the highest authority, right? How to understand Jesus and the law was not a big deal, right? So the other gospels tries not to talk about the law at all, right? I mean, they don't need to explain about the law because the initial readers are Gentiles, right? But they promote the power of the word of Jesus Christ, right? They immediately just say, this is the word of Jesus Christ. Let's listen, let's obey. That's it. They don't have to explain about it was prophesied in the Old Testament and it was fulfilled in this way, therefore we have to obey that one, right? They just skip the first part and say, hey, this is the word of Jesus Christ. Let's listen and obey, right? So thirdly, characteristic of the Gospel of Matthew is it emphasizes Jesus as the Messiah who has come as a king, right? Messiah as a king. Firstly, I'm sure that you know Matthew chapter 1 verse 1, right? It says the book of genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham, right? So it shows that Jesus came as a king following the lineage of King David, right? King David. Not only that, Jesus is the King of kings who has all authority in heaven and on earth. Matthew chapter 28 verse 18. Matthew chapter 28 verse 18. Can anyone read it for us? Amen. Right? So the Gospel of Matthew is called the Gospel of a King. Gospel of a King. Secondly, it relates the fulfillment of prophecies in the Old Testament with the life of Jesus Christ. I already told you, right? In the Gospel of Mark, there are only 2 times of fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecies. In the Gospel of Luke, it focuses on the death and the resurrection of Jesus. In the Gospel of John, it focuses on suffering of Jesus Christ, right? Once again, Mark, there are only 2 times, right? In the Luke, it focuses on death and resurrection of Jesus, and John focuses on suffering of Jesus. However, in the Gospel of Matthew, many prophecies of the Old Testament were related to the life of Jesus Christ, right? Life of Jesus. Right. However, finally, it wasn't completely ignorant to the Gentiles. The Gospel of Matthew was not completely ignorant to the Gentiles. The reason why we can say it is because, firstly, Matthew chapter 8 verse 11. Matthew chapter 8 verse 11.
I say to you that many shall come from east and west, and recline at the table before him, in Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven.
Amen. Many shall come from east and west, right? That is not only Jew, right? They are including Gentiles as well. So in the Gospel of Matthew, it also contains small, right? But the vision of saving Gentiles as well, right? Second is, in the Messianic genealogy, Gentile women like Ruth, Rahab were included, right? You don't need any explanation, right? We all know that. Thirdly, in Great Commission, right? Great Commission, it contains the vision of world mission as well. Matthew chapter 28, verse 19 and 20. Amen. Right. So you can see that in the Gospel of Matthew, it also contains the vision for the Gentiles as well. Right. So content, the appearance of the Messiah, his birth and childhood. Matthew chapter 1 to 2. Right? Secondly, the ministry of Messiah, ministry. First, baptism and temptation. Baptism and temptation. That is Matthew chapter 3, verse 1 to chapter 4, verse 12. Secondly, it's about public ministry. Public ministry. That is chapter 4, verse 13 to chapter 20, verse 34. Then, suffering of Messiah, suffering. Firstly, the last 7 days. Matthew 21, chapter 21 to 25. Secondly, crucifixion. Matthew chapter 26 to 27. Finally, victory of the Messiah. Resurrection and Great Commission. That is Matthew chapter 28. So later, when you come to book of Matthew, right? If you remember, if you refer to these contents and read the Bible, it will enable you to understand more and why it is written that way as well, right? You got it, right? May I move? Okay. So secondly, the book of Mark, right? The book of Mark, Gospel of Mark. Right, the fundamental characteristic of the book of Gospel of Mark is Jewish writer wrote to the Gentile readers. So Jews to Gentiles. Jews to Gentiles. Or Jews to Romans. Romans. Right? So Jewish writer wrote for Gentile readers, thus it contains both Jewish and Roman characteristics. Roman here, Latin language. So it contains both Jewish and Latin characteristics. Firstly, it used Latin in the Gospel of Mark. Thus, it brings out Latin characteristic, right? It brings Latin characteristic. So Latin. Firstly, example is Mark chapter 12, verse 42. Mark chapter 12, verse 42.
Will be looking into small. Which one?
Yes, ascent there in original Bible, in Greek, it is quadrants. And this is Latin, right? This is derived from Latin. Quadrants means a quarter, right? Quadrants means quarter. So 2 coins, 2 copper coins, is equivalent to 1/4 of a proper coin, right? Do you understand? Quadrants means a quarter. So two copper coins equivalent to 1/4 of a coin. I think here coin it could mean silver coin, right? It could mean the coin that Roman used at the time, right? So you can see that Latin language is used here, right? Latin language. Secondly, Mark chapter 15, verse 16. Mark chapter 15, verse 16.
The soldier took him away into the palace, that is the praetorium, and they called together the whole Roman court.
Amen. Right. The praetorium, right? Praetorium is also the Latin or Roman culture, Roman name of a place where things happen, right? The inner court or praetorium, right? So you can see that the Gospel of Matthew contains Latin languages itself, right? But second characteristic is not only Latin but also Aramic. Aram is used. The language of Aram is used. So Hebrew, Aram, Latin, right? The 3 languages all together used for the Gospel of Mark, right? So Aram languages. Aram languages, few more. Mark chapter 3, verse 17.
And James the son of Zebedee, and John the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of God.
In Korean, Boanerges or Boanerges, right? Boanerges. That is from Aram. So it's like in English we use French a lot as well, right? Like a schedule, right? When we say schedule, that is actually French word, right? That it came to English, so we just use as a schedule, but we pronounce as like French, right? So schedule, right? Genre as well, right? Genre, right? Genre. It's also from French, right? So in the same way, it's the Latin society, but they are still using Aram and Hebrew, right? And this is the point that they use Aram. I mean, yeah, for us we use Chinese in English and everything, right? So in the same way, they also use the different languages at the same time. And the Gospel of Mark, the author of the Gospel of Mark, chose to describe that typical part with Aramic language, right? And with Latin language, right? So that teaches us that this author wants to teach this to the people who speaks Latin and people who speaks Aram as well, right? Secondly, so here it says that James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, he gave the name To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. So James and John, right? James and John, they are the sons of thunder, right? Sons of thunder. They are so faithful. They are so, in a way, aggressive, right? Sons of thunder. This is, yeah. Let's move on. Mark chapter 7, verse 11. You don't have to read all, right? Here you can see the korban there, korban, right? Korban is also Aramaic language, korban. Korban means it is given to God. So when the mother or when the son has to take care of their parents, right? Or sometimes they don't want to do it, right? And they claim korban means that my all belonging, all the possession that I have is already given to the church, right? It's given to God. I decide to donate everything that I have to God. Therefore, I have no money to take care of you. That's korban, right? Mark chapter 7, verse 34. Here, ephada, right? Ephada, right? Means be open, right? Be open. Ephada. This is an Aramaic word. And then lastly, Mark chapter 14, verse 36. Abba, Father, right? We all know Abba. Abba is also Aramaic language. And at that time, it was kind of a typical phrase that they use in prayer. They call God Abba, Father. So Abba is Aramaic, Father is, of course, Hebrew, right? Or Greek, right? So they kind of combine this together. Abba means father, father means father, right? So it's a father or dead father. But anyway, it was the phrase, the typical phrase that they use in prayer. Abba, Father, right? Right, the second characteristic of the book of Mark is it emphasized Jesus as the Messiah who has come to serve. Who has come to serve. Messiah to serve, right? Come to serve. In Mark chapter 10, verse 45. Mark chapter 10, verse 45.
Even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life for his sake.
Therefore, the Gospel of Mark describes about Jesus who suffers. Jesus who suffers. More than 1/3 of Mark describes about the Son of Man who suffers. More than 1/3 describes about suffering, right? Especially after Mark chapter 11, it focuses solely on the suffering of Jesus Christ. So more than 1/3, and after Mark chapter 11, it solely focuses on suffering of Jesus Christ. Well, there could be many reasons why it had happened that way. But when Mark was writing the Gospel of Mark, there was a great persecution from Roman Empire upon Christians and upon Christianity, right? So seeing that many congregations, many believers being martyred, and because of that being filled with fears, Mark emphasized that by partaking in the suffering of Jesus is the way to follow Jesus Christ. Do you understand? Because the situation at that time, especially, that was not the entire reason, but one of the reasons why Gospel of Mark focuses on suffering of Jesus Christ a lot is because that Mark saw many Christians being martyred and being filled with fears because of the persecution. And he tries to explain that by partaking in the suffering of Jesus Christ, or suffering for Jesus Christ, right, is the way to follow Jesus Christ. Right? Thirdly, it says it takes a form of public literature. Public literature. I do not understand what it means. Public literature. But if I explain this way, it is explained this way. If the Gospel of Matthew records the life of Jesus mostly in timely order, right? So it's like a history book, right? However, the Gospel of Mark records according to a few topics, right? So the Gospel of Matthew doesn't really care about timely manner, timely order, but he decides something and he describes about that, right? And he decides about something, so he describes about that, right? That's the difference between Matthew and Mark, right? In grammar, in literature, right? Slightly different format. So contents, once again, contents. Right. Firstly, preparation of ministry. Preparation. Baptism, right? It's in Mark chapter 1, verse 1 to verse 13, right? Baptism. And ministry of gospel. Ministry of gospel in Galilee. Mark chapter 1, verse 14 to chapter 6, verse 29. Right? After the Galilee, northern area. Mark chapter 6, verse 30 to chapter 9, verse 50. And then in Berea. Berea. B-E-R-E-A. Berea. Berea. Mark chapter 10. After that, what it should be? Mark describes about suffering, right? So suffering of Jesus. Suffering. Entry to Jerusalem. Mark chapter 11 to 13. 11 to 13. And then suffering and death. Mark chapter 14 and 15. Finally, resurrection and ascension, right? Resurrection and ascension, resurrection and Great Commission. Mark chapter 16. Right. So this ends today, right? But of course, the Bible is the Word of God, right? The Bible is the Word of God. However, the Bible, every author, individual, God used the skills and ability of each authors, right? And also God, according to their skills and the ability, that different types of literature skill, different types of their grammar, right? Different types of wording, different types of illustration were used in the Bible, right? So in order to understand the Bible fully, right, we also have to know what kind of grammar, what kind of background it takes, right? and the author was discipled or was trained, right? For example, Apostle Peter and Apostle Paul. We all know that Apostle Paul is highest educated person at the time, right? Whereas Apostle Peter was almost uneducated person, right? Their languages and their way of explaining things and their way of arguing or debating or explaining things cannot be same, right? Cannot be same. God will give them something to write, but from there on, as long as they don't go out from from the will of God, from the boundary of God's will, right? Then God just leave it, right? God left it. God left them alone, right? So, yes, I mean, it applies to not only the New Testament, but it applies to the Old Testament as well, right? We know that Moses used different way of calculating the times, right? We know that the Chronicles use a different time of, right? Daniel, Nehemiah, well, right? Now we are familiar with this kind of differences in the Bible, right? It is not because Bible is wrong, but it's because God allowed these authors to write in their way, right? As long as it doesn't crush, it doesn't go out from the contents and the message that God wants to deliver, right? So hopefully by studying the four Gospels and different characteristics, when we come to read these four Gospels, it may help you to see better, right, and understand better. Amen? Amen.